The views and opinions expressed by those who appear during this virtual panel are not necessarily the views of the National Urban League. The National Urban League is a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation, and as such, we are nonpartisan. For today's virtual event, we extended invitations to the vice presidential candidates from each of the major parties. Only Senator Kamala Harris accepted our invitation.
The power is in your hands.
It's critical for you to vote.
Gather your friends, family, and everybody you know.
It's a battle for income equality, fairness, and education.
Eliminating disparities in healthcare, criminal justice reform.
And your vote can make a difference.
Reclaim your vote.
For more information, go to reclaimyourvote.org.
I welcome you to Reclaim Your Vote. What's at stake for Black America? This town hall is the latest in our ongoing virtual series, The Urban League Fights for You. And it is by far the most critical. The 2020 election is here. The nation is already deep in early voting, and millions have voted thus far. November 3rd is just around the corner. So what's at stake for Black America in this election? In a word, everything is at stake. That's right, everything is at stake. Never in your life, in my life, in our lifetimes, has the needle shifted so perilously in the wrong direction. Away from justice, away from economic parity, away from equity in education, away from fairness, away from inclusion, away from an America that lifts up all people, and away, yes, from police accountability. Meanwhile, the effects of systemic racism continue to widen racial disparities in health, in education, in jobs, and all across the board. Democracy itself is at stake. The very system that we choose to elect our elected officials. The integrity of the electoral process has been thrown into doubt by a crippling pandemic and deliberate acts of misinformation, disinformation, political interference, and, yes, voter suppression. We will not be deterred by voter suppression, and we will not be intimidated into not exercising our right to vote. This town hall will examine the high stakes and the great challenges of reclaiming our vote in 2020. For African Americans, full voter participation isn't merely a goal. It's a necessity. It's a must. It's an imperative. It's a command. And it is a responsibility. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your support for the work of the National Urban League affiliates, and the work for civil rights and social and economic justice across the land. This is a serious moment and a serious discussion, and therefore the National Urban League is pleased to have with us today the Democratic candidate for the vice presidency of the United States of America, Senator Kamala Harris. Welcome, Senator.
Hey, everybody. First, I just want to thank Mark for his tireless leadership over the years, and especially now in these trying and difficult times. You know, Joe and I are so grateful for all you are doing to help Americans reclaim their votes, because we know our votes have been earned through painful sacrifice and determination over generations. And there has never been a more critical moment for us to all make our voices heard. When Joe asked me to join this ticket, I said yes without hesitation, and without a doubt that together we could help our country through these historic challenges. As you all know, we are in the midst of a deadly pandemic, an economic crisis, a climate crisis, and a reckoning on racial injustice. But we have a president who refuses to do his job, who stokes chaos and division, who fans the flames of racism and refuses to condemn white supremacists, who purposefully lied to the American people about the threat of the coronavirus, who is fighting in the Supreme Court to get rid of Obamacare, also known as the Affordable Care Act, in the middle of a pandemic, all while jamming through a Supreme Court justice to help him do exactly that. A president who will rip away protections from millions of Americans with pre-existing conditions. And we know what that means for Black folks as we battle disproportionate health burdens with less access to affordable care. Americans deserve a leader who will unite us, who will protect us, who will wake up every morning with the safety and strength of our families and our democracy on their mind. That's Joe Biden. And Joe and I will lead with honesty, treat the American people with respect, and implement a plan to get this pandemic under control. We will rebuild our economy to support working people, small businesses, and those who have been hit the hardest by the pandemic. And advancing racial equity will be central to our efforts. Joe and I will work to expand access to quality and affordable health care and lower costs for everyone. This mission is more important than ever as the health and economic impacts of COVID-19 have been exacerbated by the disparities long faced by Black Americans. And Joe and I will work to root out the systemic racism that still exists within our courtrooms, our prisons, and our criminal justice systems. The bottom line is together, we will win this race. We will build back better, and we will unite our country again. But we can't do it alone. We need your help. So please make a plan, write down when, where, and how you will vote. And then make sure everyone you know does the same. You can go to iwillvote.com to get more information. Thank you for everything you are doing to move our nation forward. Let's not wake up on November 4th wishing we'd done more. Thank you again. Now, let's do this, Urban League. Let's do it together.
Thank you, Senator Harris, for your message and for acknowledging the importance of the African American vote in this year, 2020. Indeed, the Black vote will prove decisive in the outcome in the presidential contest and in many other critical state and local races around the country. However, there's a question before us, and it is, will our vote survive the process? How do we ensure safe access to the polls and ensure that every ballot is counted? We want to delve deeper into these and other voting issues that directly affect our community. I'm very proud to have someone who's no stranger to the National Urban League, and that is Angela Rye. She's an award-winning host, social justice advocate, commentator, and principal and CEO of Impact Strategies, a political advocacy firm. We're happy to have her serve as the moderator for our panel discussion. Welcome, Angela Rye, to Reclaim Your Vote.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Rye. Thank you so much, Mark, for that wonderful introduction and for this opportunity to sit with you all as we talk about Reclaim Your Vote. We have a dynamic panel here today that have joined us, and I'm so thankful to be able to share some time with these brilliant minds and some good friends. Our first panelist is Alicia Garza. She is a civil rights activist and a prolific writer who just is dropping her new book, as you all see behind her, The Purpose of Power. She is also the co-creator of Black Lives Matter and the principal of Black Futures Lab. Alicia, welcome. We also have political commentator, prolific podcast host, Bakari Sellers. Thank you so much for joining us. I call him Mentor Dad. You all call him Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. This man has all the jobs. He's an academic, an author, preacher, radio host, and how many books, Doc?
23.
23 books. He is now the Distinguished University Professor of African American and Diaspora Studies and professor at the Divinity School at Vanderbilt University. Welcome, Doc. We also have Ray Shackelford. He is the national president of the National Urban League Young Professionals. Next up, we have Amanda Seals. She is a comedian, an activist, also an author, an actor, a rapper. singer, songwriter, founder of Smart, Funny, and Black. She got characters on characters. You've seen her on Insecure. And last, but certainly not least, we have Sadiqa Reynolds. She's the president and CEO of Louisville Urban League. She's also a continuing protester in the fight for justice for Breonna Taylor. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Okay, so let's just jump right into this. We are in the middle of an election, arguably the most important election of our lifetime. I think there's no argument. Nonetheless, some folks are continuing to argue. So let's talk about the state of this presidential race and whether Black folks are getting the things they need, both in word and in deed, from each of these campaigns, especially when you consider what's been happening on these debate stages. Bakari, my fellow commentator, I'm gonna start with you.
First, I'm from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, where we had 3 whole stoplights and a blinking light. And my mom and dad would always say that the 2 most important words in the English language are the words thank you. And I want to start by simply saying thank you to you all, from my colleagues from the Urban League who are on the ground doing God's work every single day. The 2 that are joining us on this panel, thank you so much. Dr. Dyson, as always, it's an honor to be with you. You're a good old guy for me and Angela to look up to. And I will be completely honest with you, Alicia, Amanda Seals, and Angela Rye are the backbone that keeps us going. I count all 3 of them in the same stature and category that I do with Fannie Lou or Ella Baker, et cetera. So I just want to say thank you for everything you have done, you are doing, and you will do. Are we getting everything we need from these candidates? That's a loaded question. It's a tough question because we have so much that we do need. Everyone asks me, what's the biggest issue that you have? And I say there's no ist, there's no most. We have people in our communities that live in food deserts, don't have access to clean water, or punished because of the zip code they're born into. Small businesses are shutting down. We're being engulfed by a pandemic. And I haven't even talked about state-sanctioned violence. So, you know, I am pleased that for the first time in a long time, the Democratic Party has the, thanks to Alicia, more so than anything else, has one of the more progressive Black agendas we've had in the history of this country. You know, I am hard pressed to believe that my friends on the right will be compelled to do more, but we always will challenge them too. I think that a healthy discussion between both parties about how to improve the plight of Black folk is actually good. That just ain't what we see right now. And so November 3rd, my hope is that Black folk actually come out and exercise their right, overcome the voter suppression that we see. We see long lines in Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, where we have great people running for office. And so one of the things that I'll end on this, because I'm not really answering your question because we just have so far to go. But I will tell you this, Angela, we've been here 401 years. And one of the things that Black folk have always remained is faithful and hopeful. And I will not allow anyone to take away my faith or my hope.
Well, I am hopeful that this next panelist, Alicia Garza, will answer my question. I'm going to pivot just a little bit, Alicia, to Bakari's last point around you making sure that the Democratic Party, really any party that would engage, would have a much more progressive agenda that would embrace and hear the needs and really solve for the issues that have plagued our communities for too long. Through Black to the Future, you brought us Black Agenda 2020 by talking to 30,000 Black people all over the country. Talk about your why and whether or not you're pleased with the progress just yet.
Well, thank you, Angela, and it's an honor to be on this panel with all of you. But to my big sis, thank you for throwing out that excellent question. First and foremost, the why of why we did the Black Agenda 2020, the Black Census Project, and the other projects we do at the Black to the Future Action Fund is because Black people deserve to be powerful in every aspect of our lives, and politics should not be any exception. And the fact of the matter is, when it comes to politics and Black folks, too often our communities are spoken to, or they're spoken about. We are spoken around, but we're not directly engaged. And that is a huge problem when it comes to democracy. The fact that we can talk about Black people without talking to us about the issues that we care about, the issues that are shaping our lives and our circumstances every single day. And the reason that we did the Black Agenda was to make clear that, you know, the consequence of not speaking directly to our communities about the things that we need is that we don't generate the kinds of solutions that close the gap. And, you know, the folks who are closest to the pain have most clarity about what needs to happen in order to shift it. And when we don't engage our communities around the things that we know we need, what we do is we create wider and wider gaps in our democracy. And we create a dynamic where Black folks feel like, well, we're damned if we're do and we're damned if we don't. And so for us, you know, the Black Agenda 2020 is really clarifying what are the things that we can be doing right now to make Black Lives Matter from City Hall all the way up to Congress. And it's an agenda for us to hold politicians and elected officials accountable to. For people to get our votes, they should be saying that this is the agenda that they plan to bring into city halls and state houses and into Congress. And if they don't do that, then they should be removed. They should not be representing us. In terms of the question around progress, Angela, I can say a little bit. You know, Bakari is right that the platform on the DNC side is certainly much more progressive than it's been. And we had to fight tooth and nail to get the Black agenda, you know, to be incorporated into that platform. I think on the Republican side of the House, just to keep it a nonpartisan conversation, you know, similarly, they are using some elements of, I think, Black communities being not just distrustful, but certainly disengaged from democratic politics. In fact, the Platinum Plan is talking all about how Democrats don't care about Black people. And so we still have some work to do here to make sure that Black folks feel counted. And if we don't feel counted, if we're not engaged, the consequences are this. Either we won't engage at all, or we leave room for opportunistic politicians to move in and sell us wolf tickets. And we all know where that can take us.
Wolf tickets. What y'all know about a wolf ticket? I'm gonna go to you, Ray, to talk about whether or not you think that candidates are speaking to the needs of young professionals, especially given your role with the Urban League Young Professionals. What is the conversation like among you and your peers when you all are getting together talking about the 2020 election? Maybe not even at just the presidential level, but also in other federal, state, and local races.
Yes, thank you for that, Angela. Definitely a pleasure to be amongst you all. Shout out to my Morehouse brother. I didn't get the memo by rocking the hoodie today, or I'd have had mine on. But also paying homage to my sister, phenomenal leader, someone who I look up to, CEO Sadiqa Reynolds. She's been leading the fight there on the ground in Louisville. We definitely do not feel like we have been adequately reflected in the conversation when you're talking about the debates at the federal level, and even sometimes at the local level as well, which we often try to emphasize because it's more easy to see the impact from a day-to-day basis in terms of how those politics are reflected in your life. But even when you're talking about the questions around social justice and race, they definitely did not adequately speak to those things. And, you know, in our movement, we've been very much a part in conjunction with Black Lives Matters and several other civil rights organizations when you're talking about protests, advocacy, pushing people like Daniel Cameron to do the right thing, even though he clearly did not. And so one of the things we want to see is more of that when you're talking about speaking to us, our issues, not just as Black people, but when you're talking about as young Black people.
I want to come to you, Sadiqa, because as you know, Ray just mentioned Daniel Cameron, and given your very prominent role with what's happening on the ground in Louisville and what hasn't happened, can you talk about what you need to hear from candidates pursuing the highest office in the land as it relates to Breonna Taylor and what justice for Breonna Taylor would look like? Are you satisfied with the answers you've heard so far in either debate and conversation online from any of the candidates, and what do you need to hear going forward?
No, listen, it is very unsatisfactory. So I'm glad that Senator Harris has been willing to, you know, talk about Breonna and what's happened with Breonna. Obviously, we're not seeing anything that is anywhere near truthfulness on the side of the Republican Party. And that's not a partisan comment, that's just the facts. As far as I'm concerned, every elected official in this city, Louisville, Kentucky, where I live and have given birth to 2 children, has been dishonest. They have failed to do their jobs. Daniel Cameron narrowed the scope, first of all. That's the first thing. So 6 months later, 6 months after this young woman is dead, we still don't even know if our police department had a valid warrant. So we still can't answer the question about whether or not police should have even been in that house. No elected official is answering that. Daniel Cameron hasn't done that. And I am urging people here in the state of Kentucky to make sure he pays for his failure to do his job. I think he definitely misrepresented when he tried to say to us what the grand jury suggested versus what actually he never presented to the grand jury. But for a grand jury attempting to come forward to say, you know, I'd like to talk, I feel like he's thrown us under the bus, we wouldn't even know that he did not present the 2 officers to the grand jury. So there's a lot of discretion that has been used, and I think it's inappropriate. I think we've got to talk about a grand jury system in this country that has one standard for a police department and another standard for a regular person. And this is important. I am a lawyer. I'm a former judge. I've been a public defender. I know what I'm talking about. It takes on average, generally, we can indict about 12 people in an hour. These police officers, they investigated for 6 months and then presented for 2 days. The young Black man who was indicted in a state that has a stand your ground law, it took them 3 minutes to indict Kenny. You understand? So the process was different. And the way I read the Constitution and the way I read the KRS statutes, it shouldn't be a different process. So I want these politicians telling us what they are going to do to ensure that Black people, wherever they are, whatever their station in life, have the same justice that white folks have been allowed to have, that police officers are allowed to have. But that's just the way it has to be. Beyond that, though, and I think we've been really clear about this in Louisville, we are not just about police reform. We think that has to happen. We absolutely believe it. And we applaud Tamika Palmer, who is the mother of Breonna Taylor, who actually negotiated some police reform into her settlement. That's great. Beyond that, though, listen, we've got an achievement gap that is growing and growing and growing. Somebody's got to be willing to invest in education. At some point, we've got to say, and we have actually started this in Louisville, we have this fund here that will take care of a student's first 60 hours of college, because money shouldn't be the issue, right? These Black kids deserve to go to college. We've got to be willing to invest in that. We have 6,000 homeless children. That's not just in Louisville, Kentucky, right? That's everywhere. What are we doing to invest in affordable housing? And this is important to me, Angela, not just affordable housing, but affordable housing with a pathway to Black ownership. I want the United States of America to respond to redlining. We all talk about it, the banks talk about it, but nobody does anything about it. We know that it happened, let's fix it. It's probably the easiest fix we could do in this country because we have so many vacant and abandoned properties. You got the banks that have made money hand over fist with this administration, invested in urban communities with the pathway to Black ownership, and also some really significantly low affordable housing so that we don't have this homelessness issue. I think that's we always want to invest, or politicians like to invest in police, but they don't want to invest in the root cause changes that actually change the living conditions so that people can have different outcomes. And I think that's really important for us to do. And then the last thing, well, I'll just say this. COVID-19, people have to talk about the health disparities in our communities. In the wealthiest country in the world, you should not be able to predict your life expectancy by your zip code. We can still do that here. We can still do that, I'm sure, across the country. Those are the kinds of things that we've got to push on to make sure that people are addressing the conditions that we are living in these communities.
Doc, as we talk about what it means to reclaim our vote, as if we ever lost sight of that, we know that there are a lot of folks in our community who feel disenfranchised. What are some of the ways that we can lean into our political power when we are feeling that, especially as Sadiqa just so eloquently put it around COVID-19 and the disparities that exist from a healthcare standpoint to a criminal justice or an injustice standpoint to voter suppression and everything negative that's going on, we get hit the hardest. Everything positive, we miss that boat. So how do we feel like reclaiming our vote when we feel like there's so many other things that we can't reclaim and we've never really even had?
Well, it's an excellent question. It's always an honor to be on here with my brilliant, beautiful, and intensely passionate daughter, Angela Rye. And then Angela, Alicia, Amanda, Sadiq, Triple AS, they have been the rescue squad for so much of this generation. And to my brothers, R&B, Ray, and Bakari, they've been the rhythm like Donny Hathaway and Sam Cooke to provide opportunity for us to harmonize together. But since Bakari has relegated me to the old man, I guess I'll be Grady off of Sanford and Son and say—
Y'all didn't know he had bars. Y'all didn't know he had bars.
Every time.
So the thing is this, the kind of cosmic view of Blackness. And I operate in a world where Blackness always is the predicate for my perspective, unapologetically. It's the universe I know, it's the womb in which I was born. It's the beginning place for so much of meaning in this American existence. So when you talk about all that stuff, you know, a lot of people then put voting second, third, fourth, fifth, not even relevant, because you're right. We're facing a dual pandemic, at least. On the one hand, spongy lungs, on the other hand, blue plagues. What do they have in common? Police brutality and COVID-19, the cry, I can't breathe. That is the unifying cry of a people who are besieged by a global pandemic that has had deleterious and disproportionate consequence on us as a people, on the body politic, and on the Black body writ large. And on the other hand, we know that the inveterate commitment to Black non-being, the metaphysical disappearance of Black people, the erasure, the evisceration, the removal of Blackness is a project of white supremacy from the jump street. And so everything we see manifest in this culture right now, where we are falling low on the totem pole, so to speak, is nothing but the contemporary rearticulation of a very old and deeply entrenched reality. So you say then, well, what is voting going to do about that? Well, a lot of people did suffer for that. A lot of people continue to suffer for that. A lot of people died for it. A lot of people continue to die as a result of the consequences of that voting. And we need nothing more eloquent than to see that, hey, first of all, we can get on a jury if we are, you know, registered to vote. We can also register our opinion about the world in which we live. Now, look, we know it ain't perfect. We know, and look, I read all of y'all. I read Amanda Seals every day. I read Angela Rye every day. I read Alicia Garza every day. I'm learning to listen to Sister Sadiqa and be inspired by her leadership and these two brothers. Look, I learn from young people. So I know that there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of shenanigans being pulled, a lot of people who are being discouraged. But don't let the folk on the other side deprive you of the fundamental energy to use whatever is at your disposal to make your stuff better. Is it perfect? No. Is it the ideal? No. But for right now, it is, I think, an opportunity for us to say we're not going to put up with the crap that's gone on before and to hold people accountable. It amazes me when people look, I fought hard with my fellow leftists back in 2016. Ain't no difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. How you like it now? How you like the fact that at least you could push Joe Biden, right? You can say, look, Alicia Garza in the Futures Lab has generated a Black agenda that is critical and vital to the perpetuation of a legacy of social justice and liberation. They got items, they got documents, they've articulated this, and it ain't the first one. At least you can push them. You can say to Senator Kamala Harris, look, this is very serious what we're dealing with, and you as vice president have a role to play, a historic legacy to bear because of Black women and what they have meant. At least we have elbow room to be able to negotiate in a nonpartisan acknowledgement there. So for me, I think it's extremely important for us to leverage the vote and don't let people discourage you to the point it don't make no difference. It don't make no difference if you buy that. Look, and let me end by saying this. As tough as it is now, and trust me, it is, baby, this ain't the worst we done faced as a people. We have to remember the glory of our own history. If you look at David, and he said, the reason I could beat Goliath is I done used 5 smooth stones in the past to beat up on some bears. I know I can whip this darn giant before me. And though we face white supremacy, whose ignominious debt to a kind of vicious repudiation of Black life grows ever larger as we face people who are trying to kill governors, who are trying to kidnap them and hold them to account, who go into state houses with guns drawn, while Black people's flesh continues to rot beneath the horror of white people who don't understand our plight and predicament. Now, voting to me says we vote because the Republicans understand it's the Supreme Court. They can lose the Senate. They got a 6-3 balance in the Supreme Court. That means everything that a president and Biden and a Vice President Harris will put forth can be ultimately renegotiated because of what this man has done on the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary as well. So all I'm arguing is when you vote, you ain't just voting for president, you voting for dog keeper, you voting for prosecutor. Daniel Cameron has an elected office. That means he can be unelected. When we talk about Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, that's an elected office. So use the power you have at your disposal to gain more purchase on fundamental rights and privileges that should have been ours from birth. And then we can expand this opportunity and we can move forward in the name of a historic legacy of fighting against white supremacy that refuses to give up hope as the ultimate lever of Black victory and Black success.
Thank you, Doc. Bakari, side note, how did you let me forget that you were a New York Times best-selling author of My Vanishing Country? I don't know how that happened. Don't say nothing. Just hold your mule. My bad.
Oh, humility. I got about a gallon.
Well, praise the Lord. Amanda, so you are so opinionated on so much. And this year, this election cycle, I can tell you that I personally have seen really, like, you just lean into politics in a new way, asking questions. You had a translation moment with you and Alicia where you educated the culture. I want to just hear from you on why. What's your why? What made you want to delve into politics and the understanding of politics this time? I think in a really dope way that encourages people who don't normally pay attention to get involved, to pay attention and to educate themselves on the power of their vote.
Well, it's critical. You know, like I consider myself a common sense specialist, and it just requires very little common sense to see that it's critical that we become no longer apolitical. Like we got to exercise a certain level of apathy for a while, I think, because there was a semblance, or at least a seeming like, you know, it's cool, you know, they got this. Like, and for myself, I can say that I felt safe. I think for what it's worth, I think a lot of folks who kind of consider themselves like upstanding citizens and are, you know, waking up every day to do their best, they just kind of felt safe. You felt Black. You knew that there was still an American barometer of whackness when it comes to Blackness, but I got the boss too. But at the end of the day, you still felt like there were people working, even if you weren't, you know, us like ardently working, there were people who were doing that work, and that, well, we've come so far, we're not going to go backwards. You know, we may not have gotten as forward as we want to go, but we're not going to go backwards. And I know that I was among many who thought, well, y'all fools ain't going to vote for Donald Trump. Like, come on now. And I felt like I had to say something because the voices of tyranny, the voices of anti-Blackness, the voices of ignorance and of alternative facts have just become so deafening. They've become so amplified that it's become seemingly the norm. And once that happens, you look around and you're like, wait a minute, that means that the society that I thought I was in is not the case anymore. I am now in the minority by just simply having common sense and interest in the best possible outcome for my fellow for the people in my community. So I talked to you, Ange, and I know you definitely have done a great job of informing me and educating me on even just civics, you know, just the basics of like, how do bills become laws and things that you learned, but that you just really didn't exercise. Like there's a couple of things that I just don't remember. Like it's hard for me to remember my 8 timetables. Like it is. I don't use my 8 timetables on a regular basis. So like, I'm like 8 times 7. 56? I don't know. Is it 7 times 8, 48? Yes, that's what it was. You see, I had to use a mnemonic device because I don't use it like that. Same with these civics lessons. Like I wasn't using it like that. So I forgot about the systems and things that were in place. And by talking to people like you, Ange, and Alicia, and doing my own research, you know, it really has helped to gain that energy back. But then also it's just, if I'm being perfectly honest, one of the biggest things that's been driving me to speak is just sadness. I'm just sad. I'm so sad when I see my community so willingly duped. And, you know, there's a part of you that says like, you know what, only concern yourself with the people who get it, or else you'll drive yourself crazy. But I don't know any, you know, there's a reason why I've broken up domestic violence fights in the street, because I just can't stand by and watch like just trash. I just can't watch bad things happen and be a silent bystander, which is part of the reason why I feel like any Black person with sense at this point has to consider leaving this place, because you will go crazy if you stay here and it gets to a point where you really cannot be effective, you know, on a daily basis. And so I being on here with all of you is it's such an inspiration and honor. And one of the things I will say to all of you is that it never ceases to amaze me, your commitment to tirelessness in these spaces, because I get tired, you know, but y'all don't. If you do, you don't show it. I have never seen Angela Rye tired in my life. If she's taking naps, we don't know, you know, we don't know. But that is what has inspired me, and the biggest thing that inspires me is trying my best to see how this Black community that we talk of ideologically can actually come to exist realistically. Because I don't think it exists the way we think it does.
Yeah, I love that Amanda's leaning into the idea that Black people are not monolithic, something that we have to regularly say, especially to our white counterparts who are like, Bakari, Doc, Alicia, what do Black people think about this? And to that point, Alicia, I know
that's not what I was leaning into.
Well, I just leaned into it for you, sis, because I think it's an important transition on this monolithic piece.
Angela, can I say something about something
really quick, because I need to get to Alicia. She has a heart out at the top of the hour. Go ahead, Sadiqa.
Okay, I just want to say this. Amanda is also speaking to this idea that I think is really important. There are some of us in the Black community that have kind of been lulled into this sleepiness. And I think that is the point that white America and these elected officials need to be paying attention to. That idea of the sweet and docile, those of us with central air and 2- and 3-car garages, we are becoming frustrated. And it's unfortunate that some of us have been disengaged, but now that we are, I think this country really does need to pay attention to people that are saying, I've been standing on the sidelines, no more. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to get to you, Alicia. I know you have a heart out. There was a moment in the vice presidential debate where there was a fly that landed on Mike Pence's head, and it stayed there for 2.5 minutes, actually. And what I thought about in that moment is that regularly in white America, no matter what party you're in, there is this complicity that exists around what I'm now calling white toxicity instead of white supremacy, so as to take the power away. When Donald Trump said in the debate, stand back, stand by. Can you talk to us about why the biggest threat isn't Donald Trump saying stand back and stand by, but it is to all the white people who stand back and stand by watching white toxicity impact Black people in so many ways every single day? I just thought the Black Lives Matter co-creator should lean in on this point.
Well, I mean, first of all, we learned this week, right, that the Trump campaign was endorsed by the Taliban. And the Trump campaign strongly said, we don't want this endorsement. But how come you can shun the endorsement of the Taliban internationally, but you can't shun the endorsement of the Taliban domestically? I mean, literally, there are racial terrorist cells in this country that consist of white militias and white nationalists that this president is not even using a dog whistle for. He's using a bullhorn, and he's giving them a platform. He is taking them from the dustbins of history where they belong up into the present and giving them new life and reinvigorating and re-energizing them. And he's doing that on our backs. And, you know, as you said, as one of the co-creators of the Black Lives Matter Global Network, this is now the second election cycle where we've been used as a political football on both sides of the aisle, to be frank. We have Donald Trump, you know, talking about us as if we are terrorists. He's lumping in, he's saying Antifa, extremist, leftists, you know, Black Lives Matter and the whole bit. We are getting a resurgence of programs from the Justice Department, which is now fully Donald Trump's Justice Department, led by Attorney General Bill Barr, where they're talking about convening task forces to investigate extremists on the left. We're seeing a resurgence of this notion that came up in 2016 under the leadership of Jeff Sessions when he was Attorney General, in talking about Black identity extremists. And so the reason that all of this is important, Angela, is because there is actually a lot at stake. I'm not sure that I fully, let me say it this way, and I'm just gonna keep it blunt and I'm gonna keep it real. We're not in a good place right now, people. That's just the facts. And this is not the ticket that I would have wanted. This is not really even my 8th choice. But you know what's on the ballot? Racism. And I'm going to tell you right now, these people, if it was up to them, they would be re-energizing concentration camps like they're doing for immigrant children. If it was up to them, Black people would not be working for ourselves, we'd be working for them. And I mean, reversing us back 50 years, at least. So I don't want to be under any illusions here that our communities unorganized are going to be able to push these parties to do anything. But if we don't start to think about how we get organized, at least around making sure that we continue to dismantle the ways in which racism and the use of racial terror shapes our lives, then we're going to be in even worse shape. So I want to make sure that we're unequivocal about that. The fact that this president will not disavow white supremacists and white nationalists, encourages white militias to come out into the open and patrol the streets and counter protest people who are fighting for justice for our sisters like Breonna Taylor, or fighting for justice for our brothers like Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, we can't deny the fact, right, that, you know, Amanda's right. Not all of us are on the same page about this. And I think we have to get really honest with each other. Now is a time for us to get really honest about the political conditions that we're living in. It's the time to not mince words around what we're doing and what we ain't doing and what needs to happen. And frankly, it's a time for us to get clear about what's at stake. Now, it don't matter to me if you like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. What matters to me is that you like your freedom and you like the ability to do the things that you're doing right now. And I think that's what matters to a lot of Black folks. And I hope it's what's mattering to voters as they're making decisions right now in this election season.
Before you hop, Alicia, what and how can we have this conversation, and quickly, because we have like 5 seconds left, right? Like we've been saying for so long, we need to have this convening, we need to have this conversation, knowing that you have so much on your plate, including a new book that's available now, you all, The Purpose of Power. I do want to know what we do to move this conversation forward. Are you asking the people who are at home watching, you know, to have one-off conversations and text threads? Do they drop in something that's not relevant to an existing? What do we do? How do we have this conversation?
All right, well, there's 3 things we need to do. Number 1, you need to vote. I got my mail-in ballot yesterday. I'm ready to roll. And so just fill it out, put it in the envelope, sign the thing, and drop it in the drop box or put it in the mailbox. You don't need any postage. That's number 1. Number 2, call your representatives at the DNC and at the RNC, you know, keeping it bipartisan, and let people know what it is that you want to see and what you're not seeing already. And I will say, Angela, that people need to know that these parties are ours. And people need to know, right, that politics is not just a game of advancing careers, right? Politics are the decisions that are being made about us, without us, every single day. And so we need to close that gap. So if you know people who sit on the party committees, right? Reach out to them and talk to them about what it is that you want to see. The other thing I think is really, really important is to talk to all of your friends and family members about what's at stake. My family has a Zoom call every Sunday where we just talk politics. And I'm telling you, we're not always on the same page, but in this moment, there's something shifting. And so we're all talking to each other about making sure that we're voting and that we're getting out the vote. But then lastly, stay engaged. The thing here is that all of this stuff is able to happen when we tune out, when we are disinterested, when we say, oh, that's that thing happening over there. That's what people are counting on. And so frankly, you know, being engaged in whatever your lane is super important. For Amanda, you got hella lanes, girl, you got hella lanes. And I'm just glad you up in them doing what you do, because you do it very well. Those are the things that we have to do in order to close the gap here. And then lastly, sign on to the Black agenda. We have an agenda to make Black Lives Matter from City Hall to Congress, from police reform to healthcare to housing to jobs. And if we're going to get organized, we have to unify around the things that we care about and continue to hold elected officials' feet to the fire.
I love that. Thank you so much, Alicia. Bakari, I want to come to you because Alicia mentioned that, you know, this isn't the worst that Black people have had it. Like this is a part of how things can get bad, but they can get much worse. You talk a lot about your father, Cleveland Sellers, and his role in the civil rights movement. I want you for a moment to just share with us some of your father's wisdom. You can share with us some of yours too, but just what he says, right, about what he's experienced and how things can be if we're not very alert, if we're not very vigilant, and if we don't do all we can to ensure that we not only save democracy, but hell, we save ourselves too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I had the ability to speak to Reverend Otis Moss Jr., Morehouse man, class of 1956, if I'm not mistaken, a little bit earlier. And I was just taken aback by the deliberate nature in which he clearly articulated the trials and tribulations, how he toiled in the proverbial vineyard, the things that another generation had seen. And then we both took a deep breath, and it was so eerie how they're direct parallels. And I think that the greatest tragedy we have in this country is that I'm 36 and my father will soon be 76, and we have entirely too many of the same shared experiences. My father considers himself to be a part of the Emmett Till generation because everyone knows that picture in Ebony magazine that many young people tore out and put in their wallet that spurred their activism. And he would always say that Emmett was just representative of the other young Black bodies that were in rivers in Mississippi. We just found Emmett's body. And for him, that drove him to do so much. And, you know, I think one of the things that Dr. Dyson so eloquently talked about was putting imagery with the pain and the brutality that's associated with the Black experience in this country. I say this on TV often, that being Black in this country is a perpetual state of grieving. And I think that we all recognize that as we go through the systemic inequities we have in our communities, you overlay them with the pandemic, and then you have the visualizations of Black bodies. I mean, we have this addiction to kind of like, it's almost like porn, the way that people gravitate towards Black bodies being dead in the street, right? And so, you know, when we talk about these dual generations, the one thing that I can tell you with a great bit of certainty is that for the 16th Street Baptist Church in my father's generation, I have the Charleston Massacre. For Emmett Till, you know, I have Jacob Blake and Breonna Taylor, and for Jimmy Lee Jackson, I have George Floyd and Trayvon. from Medgar Evers. So there are these really, really intricate, direct parallels that we're living through. So then you ask yourself this real weird question, like, how far have we come? And I think that my father and I, we sit back and we both say that we've made a lot of progress, but we still have so far to go. And I think that those individuals who want to just look at the progress we've made without the distance we still have yet to run are doing themselves a disservice. And so I think that our task as a new generation of leader, as new thought leaders, or whatever people may call, just people who wake up every morning just trying to follow our heart and sometimes our gut, and hopefully our heart and our gut and our head end up in the same place, and try to do what's right, so that at the end of our journey, like somebody at the end says, job well done. For those of us, I think that the most difficult thing we have is our struggle right now is living for others, and living for all of those who either one, don't have the opportunity. It's not as if we're special. Ain't nobody on this panel special. We were just blessed with opportunities that there are people we know from back home that are smarter than us, that look better than us. They just didn't have the same opportunities we do. And then for those whose lives have been cut short, whether or not it's going to prison, or whether or not it's being the victim of a violent act. And so my last point on that is that we have to make sure that we're doing ourselves not just the service that you're doing in Louisville, for example, but we also need you to do that service and also take care of yourself. I know that Amanda does so much in so many different lanes, and my only concern for Amanda is not that she's going to do God's work, because we know that to be the case, but I want Amanda to take care of herself. And the same with Angela, making sure that you are making sure, and everyone watching, because this is a very stressful moment that we're living in, a stressful time, making sure that you're mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically as healthy as you can, so you can rededicate and commit yourself to a movement that's much larger than we all are.
I think there was a time, and maybe I'm romanticizing this, and Professor Dyson, Dr. Dyson, you can clear me up, but I just think there was a time when we looked at community maybe like more equanimically to our individual advancement than we do now. And when we talk about success and we talk about the advancement of Black folks, I think for a lot of folks, they measure that on people's individual advancement, but not by the community advancement. And so when Bakari talks about like opportunity and, that none of us are special, well, I disagree. I think some people are absolutely very special. And I think that, what becomes the necessity is that you think about your own individual specialness, and it's how do you extend that to the community to get people to also look at that for themselves. But ultimately, I think we have stopped considering advancement of our community as just as important as our own individual advancements by and large. And so until we start to do that again, or until we understand the immensity and importance of how that affects us individually, we are going to continue to keep moving in a selfish fashion. And as long as we do that, we will not overcome. We will not see the advancement that we want to see as a community, because we've by and large become very focused on just seeing our own individual advancements. And I don't know how that changes. And I don't know, other than just how we teach our children differently and how we move differently. But what I will say to everyone who's watching, think for yourself, what do you do to create community on a daily basis? Even if it's something as small as like, when I'm in Runyon Canyon, I say hello to every Black person, and I make a point of just trying to create connectivity. On a larger scale, I try and make sure that anything I create is giving space, not just for my own personal advancement and creativity, but also for the group and for everyone who wants to be a part of it to evolve and feel empowered in that space. And I think unless we all are thinking in that way, even in small as well as macro ways, we will continue to remain stagnant.
Thank you, Amanda. Doc, I want to come to you on this concept that I think really took off this year around earning the vote, earning the Black vote. And as we have this conversation about reclaiming our vote, to me, earning and reclaiming are both centered in our power, right? Our political power. And so you saw this real visceral reaction to people talking about earning the vote. Like, you're trying to hold the vote hostage, you're trying to suppress Black votes. Don't say that. But when it comes time for any other interest group, whether they're aligned by race or by politics or by income, everybody else can make demands of candidates. Can you talk to us about why there are so many challenges when it comes time for Black people to have demands, an agenda, and a requirement that our votes finally be earned?
That's a brilliant point. Very, very briefly, let me just respond real quick to Ms. Sills, and thank y'all but Michael is fine, but thank y'all so much for that. Let me tell you this. Augustus Dill and W.B. Du Bois in 1918 released a report about the manners and leadership of Black folk. And the thing is, it reminded me when Ms. Sills was speaking that every generation says, hey, we ain't like the people before us, right? And that's the beauty of transmitting a moral vision. We transmit stories that people buy into, even if it's not our individual experience. Every Black generation has seen the falling off of, and that's a beautiful thing. Because when we say, hey, we ain't like we used to be, there's a difference, however, between recuperating our history and nostalgia. Because nostalgia means like you're making superheroes out of people and you don't want to make yourself a superhero. That's a brilliant point that Ms. Sills was making, that all of us, when she said, I don't think she and Brother Bakari disagreed. Bakari was being his typical humble self by saying we're not special. Of course he believes he's special. He wrote a book on the New York Times. He's done other things. I've talked to him personally. He talks about Morehouse. He thinks that's a damn special school. So don't act like you think it's the same as Howard. You think it's better.
Whoa!
I'm joking, but what I'm saying is, he's coming from a point that the very special people have always said they ain't special. Martin Luther King Jr. said that unless it's everybody getting on, ain't nobody getting on. So I think, and you're right, Ms. Sills, that of course people, you have to own up to your gift and your talent. But in owning up to your gift and your talent, it makes no difference if you ain't helping nobody else along the way. Let me answer your question though, Angela Rye, in terms of the earning our vote.
I just don't even know why I'm here, because ain't nobody answer my questions.
Amanda,
you answered my questions.
Susan, you are not Susan. We are acknowledging.
No, I just took it back and I said the men.
Oh, okay, because I think I've answered your question. So let me answer this particular part of it as well. You know, everybody else can get the bang for the buck. You know what? Look at the Irish, the Polish, the Italian, the Jewish. Look at the ethnic enclaves when you had mayors of cities. The Irish ain't making no excuse. That's our man. That's what we gonna do. That's what a machine was in Chicago with Richard Daley, and they made no bones about it. Look at Boston, Beantown, made no bones about it. Look at Philadelphia, made no bones about it. Here in Washington, D.C., they reelected a man who had gone to jail for crack cocaine, because what Black folk understood, you've got to use your political wealth to spread it among Black people who have voted for you and who continue to be rewarded for that vote. Yes, you have to earn our vote. Yes, we should be unapologetic by saying, these are the things that must be met. This is the metric we use. These are the standards we deploy. And we do it unapologetically because every other ethnic, racial, geographical community, demographic, women, gays, lesbians, bisexual, the whole thing. And we know that they're interlocking realities and intersectionality. But the bottom line is, we got to get off of that. We don't believe ourselves we're worthy of demanding something in response for our vote. We don't think as Black people that that's how the game is played. And so that's why when I see young people get in and say, I voted last time, but I didn't get what I wanted, so I ain't voting no more. That's the game, bruh. That's what it is. Just because you new to it don't mean it's a new game, so learn the rules. So yes, we should demand everything that we ask for. We should have a Black agenda that is articulating our interests. We should talk about a progressive vision to which we can pay pay adherence. And at the end of the day, we got to understand that Black women in particular have saved this nation's ass time and time again. You can ask Doug Jones down in Alabama. You can go to Kamala Harris in California. You can talk about Barack Obama. You can speak about even what happened in South Carolina. Yes, it was James Clyburn who did it, but it was the Black female vote that was the Black female practice of politics that has been leveraged to the defense of Black people. So yeah, I think we should be asking for more. We should be demanding in return for our vote what it is that we want, and we should be unapologetic about that assertion.
I wanted to just go to you, Ray. I think one of the things that we've been talking about quite a bit is this idea of a dual pandemic. That there's racial injustice in this country that reached a fever pitch over the summer, but of course we're also dealing with COVID. There's a third pandemic that also is not new to Black America, and that's the economic injustices and disparities that have existed for some time. Can you talk about some of the priorities, and Sadiqa, I also want to hear from you on this, from the Urban League and other things that Black folks in particular should be paying attention to and calling on their elected officials to do and to implement as a part of an agenda that would persuade Black people to vote for them?
No, to your point, Angela, we are not solely concerned just about, social justice. Obviously I have, I think probably a shared experience with Dr. Dyson and with Bakari, and maybe even with yourself and Amanda, when you're talking about interacting with law enforcement and, how you have to behave a certain way when you get pulled over, because my father just wanted me to get home. But the other part of that is that when you're talking about millennials and Generation Z, we've been disproportionately impacted, especially as young Black people, from the economic fallout as a result of this pandemic. And so when you're talking about job loss, when you're talking about entrepreneurs, we have a number of our members across the country in more than 60 cities that own businesses, or maybe they have side hustles or they're freelance. And so all of that has been impacted. And, I saw a statistic that, nearly, I think it's like 40% of Black businesses will not be able to recover as a result of what we have been hit with, the mishandling of this virus. And so from an Urban League perspective, we are pushing for more resources when you're talking about small businesses. We have not been able to get that from the PPP program, these other federal loan programs. We've been seeing with those types of relief efforts, again, it's been disproportionately impacted or not gifted or received by our community. And so when you're talking about job loss, when you're talking about small businesses, when you're talking about homes, homes are being lost across the country. That, again, disproportionately impacts Black people. When you're talking about housing, whether it's renting or owning a home. And so those evictions, those foreclosures, the moratoriums where if they haven't been lifted in your area, they will be lifted. And what does that look like for us? Because to your point, initially, when you started the question, these are things that have always been issues in the Black community. We're talking about redlining and how they drew those lines by racial covenants. And even when you look at where George Floyd was killed and even with Breonna Taylor, when I researched both of those cities, no surprise, redlining was a huge issue in both of those areas. And so these things are very historic, it's consistent. And so we're pushing an economic agenda, a social justice agenda, housing, jobs, education. When you're talking about the digital divide, our kids not having the resources they need to get access and be educated from home. Again, just across the board, we're not getting what we need.
And Sadiqa, before you answer, I would like for you to also answer, just to kick off our last round, what's the most important thing people must do to reclaim their vote this year? And please, by all means, also address what Ray was just answering.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Angela, and thank you all. This has been an honor for me to be here and to, I'm fanning, so it's hard to stay focused. So I appreciate, this is a big deal. Listen, first of all, people need to vote. You absolutely have to show up. You have to vote. You have to show that we have the power to turn out, that we can do this, and we know that we can. We absolutely have to vote. There's just no excuse for not voting, especially here in Kentucky when the governor has now signed an executive order that allows 170,000 people who didn't have the right to vote before to now have the right. So we've been, among us nonprofit organizations, splitting up that list, calling everybody to make sure they got registered. Now we'll call again to make sure they can vote, that they actually make it to vote. And so I beg folks, please, Black people must vote. We have much too much to lose. And I think everybody on this panel has done an amazing job at explaining what the risks are. From the Urban League perspective, what we do every day, I can tell you just locally at the Louisville Urban League, on a annual basis, we are having about 23,000 visits, okay? 23,000 visits, people who need jobs, justice, education, health, or housing. And we are trying very hard to step into the gap. So we are training in some cases, a workforce. We're training people who don't have employment now, who need it. In some cases, they're underemployed. And so we're doing that work. In some cases, we're just helping with the resumes. On the justice side, you see us in the streets. I mean, we are protesting. We are raising hell in every way that we can, but we're also writing op-eds and opinions to say, you know, we need jury diversity, or we need this, we need that, whatever the issues are. We're really trying to make sure that we're lending our voice to those things. On the education side, we run programs, but the problem is, again, it's very difficult to get the support for the actual root cause work. So we can program ourselves to death, but it's hard to fix broken policy with just programs. We really do and must focus on policy change. How do we ensure that our educational system is responding to these Black children that it really never wanted and it never made any adjustments for? And I think what happens in this country, and certainly what happens in our city, there's not enough honesty about that. And so because everybody wants to be dishonest, or at least those in power and those with privilege want to be dishonest, you can't really move forward. Because if you don't have truth at the core of whatever the work is, then all you get is the Band-Aids that we've been funding. So I think that's really important work for us to continue to really push on that education piece too. On health, let me say this, and I think that we have got to deal with this in the Black community especially. We send soldiers to war and they come home, and we understand that they have post-traumatic stress disorder. We understand that the conditions of war are stressful, and if you come home and that trauma is untreated, you might wreak havoc on the community you are released back into. Well, guess what? That's happening with our community all the time. We have, and I call it, ongoing traumatic stress disorder. We have children living in communities that haven't been invested in. They're watching their parents struggle. Add to that COVID-19. We already got the police stuff happening. All of these things going on in these communities, and our young people are trying to navigate that. But we have no additional resources for mental health. It's going unchecked, untreated, no addressing of these issues, and then we wonder why crime is up. Well, that's what happens in communities that this country pays no attention to and invests nothing in. It's hard to live around liquor stores and vacant properties, and then, you know, just you're supposed to be resilient. And certainly we do have a lot of resiliency in our communities, but we shouldn't have to be superhuman. We shouldn't have to be. And so we have to push on that. And from the Urban League side, that is exactly what we do. And then I think Ray said it too, I'm sorry, the evictions right now, at some point these moratoriums run out and you have people who were already struggling. I can tell you in a 2-week period, we could pay $50,000 for people's rent. And they got like in 7 weeks, $50,000. What would they have done without us? And the thing is, the government has a process to pay, but it's so slow. There's so much bureaucracy that the league can pay it faster. And so I have to do what I have to do, because I can't allow people to be homeless, because now we're in this situation where we're in a virtual school setting. So if you get put out of your house, not only are you homeless, your kid just got put out of school. That's what we're dealing with right now. And then the other thing that's important is supporting Black dreams, small business owners, people who want to be able to work for themselves, but they can't do it because it's too hard to get that loan, because the banks treat us different, they assess us differently. And so making sure too that we're pushing for those policy changes. I think the federal government has to look at the Community Reinvestment Act with these banks. It doesn't do enough. It doesn't go far enough to correct the wrongs that America has placed in our communities. And I think we have to address that. And through the league, we are able to do all of that work. And it's not just Louisville, it's my colleagues across the country. Yeah. Thanks to Mark Morial and his phenomenal leadership.
Thank you so much, Sadiqa. So just quickly, we're going to wrap with Dr. Dyson and then Amanda with the last word. So the question is, what is the most important thing people must do to reclaim their vote this election year in just a few days?
Right, just actually vote. Know what your status is. Know whether you're registered. Still not too late in many places. Know if you can get a absentee ballot or a mail-in. Know physically where you need to go. It's a shame we don't have a national holiday for voting, but we ain't. And until we do, then you figure out how to exercise your franchise and know when you can vote, know where you're gonna go, get some other people and go with you, and y'all have a good old time, like the Flintstones used to say, and together you can leverage democracy for your advantage. And it begins with that small step toward that voting poll that makes a huge difference in your life over the next 4 years.
I'm just going to give a quick metaphor analogy. So I've had to become vegan because I have really bad acid reflux and my body needs to reset to get alkaline. And I don't want to be vegan, okay? I want to eat crab legs and steak. However, this is what I got to do to get to where I need to go. It's not forever, it's not indefinite, but it's a commitment that I'm making to myself because it's the best thing I can do for myself and for my health. I think we need to look at voting and being political in the same way. I'm not saying you got to become a pundit. I'm not saying you got to commit all wholeheartedly, dive full head into all of this. And I'm not saying you got to do so indefinitely. But what I am saying is that you got to make a commitment to this space that may not necessarily have been your bag, just for at least right now, because it's the best thing you can do for your health and your wellness and for your communities as well.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I want to give special thanks to the National Urban League for creating this very, very important moment for us to have this very critical conversation. You got to register, request your ballot, vote early, but by all means, ensure that you vote. Voting is just the beginning to exercising your political power. I want to thank our dynamic panelists today, Alicia, Amanda, Bakari, Doc, Sadiqa, and Ray. Thank you all so much for sharing these gems, this wisdom. You are brilliant, but most of all, thank you all at home for watching. Please make sure you go vote.
Reclaim your power and vote. Make a plan and follow our checklist to reclaim your vote on November 3rd. Number 1, check your voting options. 2, find your polling location. 3, know the candidates. 4, know the issues. And number 5, and most importantly, vote. Please vote. And you know what you can do? You can text VOTE to 69866 to receive updates and election reminders on key deadlines in your area. Or go to reclaimyourvote.org. That's reclaimyourvote, all one word, .org.
The views and opinions expressed by those who appeared during this virtual panel are not necessarily the views of the National Urban League.